All right, get ready for a fascinating deep dive today. We're about to explore the complex world of international relations, focusing specifically on the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, potential peace negotiations, and the role of key figures like Vladimir Putin and newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump. Buckle up, because this is a roller coaster of perspectives and possibilities.
It's really interesting to consider, whether the common narrative about Putin's ambitions might need a second look.
A second look. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made that, his goals in this Ukraine conflict, they might be more limited than we typically think.
More limited. That's a new angle for sure.
Yeah, one thing to think about is that, Putin actually stopped his advance back in April 2022.
All right.
And that suggests a willingness to negotiate, perhaps, indicating that his goals may not have been the complete takeover of Ukraine.
That's a good point. But international relations, especially when you're dealing with countries with nuclear weapons, it kind of demands predictability, right? How does that play into this whole situation?
That's a great question. Think about it this way. Even if you really disagree with someone, wouldn't you still want to know how they're likely to react in different situations?
I guess so.
Exactly. And so this expert, they suggest that Russia under Putin, they might actually prefer predictable leaders, even if they don't always see eye to eye. It's all about understanding the other side's moves. You know what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, it makes you wonder if that predictability, even when there are disagreements, could be the key to opening those doors for diplomacy.
Right.
Which brings us to Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, yes.
Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence. What role do you see her playing in all of this?
That's a fascinating choice. She's known for, her understanding of the conflict in Ukraine, and she could offer Trump insights that, they might challenge some of the assumptions within the U.S. government.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, maybe leading to a more nuanced approach to negotiations.
So let's say we're talking about peace deals here. What could those look like? What are the pieces on the board, so to speak?
Well, taking all this into account, you can imagine a situation where Ukraine doesn't join NATO. Russia gets those security guarantees it's been asking for.
Okay.
And the control of certain territories is up for negotiation.
It all sounds logical on the surface, but history, it doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to successful international agreements.
Yeah.
How can we make sure such a deal wouldn't just fall apart?
Right. And that's where verification comes in. It's really important. Historically successful agreements, they've relied on these verifiable mechanisms. Like think about the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, or the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Those treaties really leaned on intelligence gathering.
To make sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Exactly. It was all about building trust and ensuring compliance.
So essentially, you need a system to make sure everyone keeps their promises. But is that even enough in the current global climate?
Exactly. And that's what makes it even trickier. The current global situation just adds another layer of complexity to all of this.
Yeah, for sure.
Trust in U.S. commitments, it's kind of taken a hit.
Right.
Which makes having a strong and transparent verification system even more vital. Now let's shift gears a little bit and consider the Ukrainian perspective for a moment.
Sounds good. What insights do we have from that side of things?
Well, there's analysis out there from Ukrainian sources focusing on Trump's emerging plan for Ukraine.
Okay.
As it's been reported by different media outlets. From what we understand, this plan, it involves a ceasefire followed by a peace agreement.
A ceasefire and then a peace agreement, huh? That definitely seems like a step toward de-escalation. But what happens to those territories that Russia currently controls?
Right. That's one of the key issues. Under this plan, Russia could end up keeping some of those territories while Ukraine would receive security guarantees.
That's going to be a tough pill to swallow, I imagine.
It is, and there are a lot of critics of this approach.
I bet. What are some of the arguments against it?
Well, one big concern is whether using only economic pressure to influence Russia will be enough. Critics point to examples like China, countries that have been able to resist such tactics.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And here's another interesting twist. While Trump's plan seems to be all about de-escalation, there are signs that some in Zelensky's administration might actually prefer an escalation of the conflict.
Wait, hold on. Why would they want things to escalate? That doesn't seem to make sense when everyone's talking about peace.
Right. It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it all boils down to, political goals. Some believe an escalation might actually help them achieve their objectives.
Even if it prolongs the fighting and suffering.
Exactly. It's a complicated situation, that's for sure.
So we've got potential peace plans being floated, but at the same time, there's a lot of distrust and conflicting interests at play. What are your thoughts on the chances of successful negotiations actually happening?
Well, it's a tricky situation, no doubt about it, but we do know that Putin has openly said he's willing to come to the negotiating table.
That's something, at least.
It is. The big question is what each side is willing to give up.
Yeah.
And whether they can overcome the deep mistrust that's been driving this conflict from the start.
It feels like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces are constantly changing shape.
It really does. What's crucial for people to understand is that there are multiple perspectives at play here.
Okay.
We have the U.S. perspective, often focused on containing Russia, the Russian perspective focused on their security concerns, and then you have Ukraine caught right in the middle.
Right in the crosshairs.
Each side has its own motivations and goals, and that makes finding common ground incredibly challenging.
That's an important reminder. It's easy to get stuck in one narrative, but understanding the situation fully means considering everyone's point of view. Speaking of complexity, what role do economic factors play in all of this?
Yeah, those are always intertwined with geopolitical strategy, right?
Right.
Well, in this case, there's been a lot of talk about the economic tools that could be used to influence Russia, like sanctions or restrictions on energy exports.
Right, trying to hit them where it hurts.
Exactly. But we have to remember that these actions can have consequences that we don't intend,
Like a boomerang effect.
Right. They could impact global markets and even backfire on the countries that impose them.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess, where every move could trigger unexpected outcomes.
Precisely. And of course, there's always the discussion about potential military intervention.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. Some people believe that a stronger military presence is necessary to deter Russian aggression,
Okay.
while others warn that it could escalate the conflict into something much more dangerous.
That's a scary thought. It seems like finding the right balance between deterring aggression and accidentally starting a bigger war is a real tightrope walk.
Absolutely. So taking everything into account, what do you think is the most likely outcome here?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's hard to predict the future, but based on everything we've discussed, it seems like some kind of negotiated settlement is the most probable path.
I'd agree with that.
But of course, the big questions are what that settlement will actually look like and whether it'll lead to lasting peace or just a temporary break in the fighting.
Yeah, so much uncertainty.
Enough to make anyone's head spin. But one theme that keeps coming up is the importance of communication and diplomacy.
Absolutely. Diplomacy, even when it seems fragile and uncertain, it's still our best hope for stopping this conflict from spiraling even further out of control.
And that's where figures like Tulsi Gabbard could potentially be crucial, right?
Exactly.
Her experience and understanding of the different sides could be key to navigating this web of competing interests.
Absolutely. Her ability to connect with the different perspectives and communicate across those divides, it could be crucial for bridging the gaps between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. It's like finding someone who can fluently speak the language of diplomacy in a room full of people shouting different dialects of conflict.
It sounds like we're going to need a whole lot of that diplomatic skill and maybe a bit of luck to navigate this situation successfully. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
Just remember, this conflict, it's not over yet. The choices made in the next few months will have huge consequences, not only for Ukraine and Russia, but for the whole world.
Those are some pretty high stakes.
They are. What happens in one part of the globe can have ripple effects everywhere, affecting us all in ways we might not even imagine.
So before we move on, you mentioned intelligence gathering being important for verifying any agreements. Can you unpack that a little bit more? How would that work in practice?
It would definitely need to be a multifaceted approach, combining different tools and strategies. Think satellite imagery, signals intelligence, human intelligence on the ground, and on-site inspections all working together.
Wow, that's a lot to coordinate.
It is. The goal is to monitor compliance with the terms of any agreement and to do it in a way that builds trust and reduces the risk of anyone breaking the rules. Think of it like a safety net.
To catch any missteps before they turn into major problems?
Exactly.
That sounds incredibly complex, like a massive operation. And who would be in charge of all this? Who would manage this global trust-building exercise?
Well, it would likely be a collaborative effort. Maybe under the UN or a similar international body. You could have intelligence agencies from different countries working together, pooling their expertise and resources.
That level of cooperation, it sounds challenging, to say the least.
It definitely can be, but it's crucial for effectiveness and maintaining a balance of power. to make sure no one country has too much control.
So it's like a global trust-building exercise, but with extremely high stakes and the potential for things to go wrong at any moment.
That's a good way to put it. It's a daunting task, but a necessary one if we want to move past this conflict and create a future that's more stable and secure for everyone involved.
Without trust and verification, any agreement is just empty words.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've looked at peace negotiations, the difficulties of creating systems of verification, and how important it is to recognize that there's no single right way to see this conflict. We've only scratched the surface, but I hope this has given our listeners a better grasp of the challenges and opportunities ahead in this critical time for international relations. What happens now will echo throughout history, shaping the world for generations to come.
That's a sobering thought. It sounds like we've got a lot more to explore. So stay tuned for the next part of our deep dive as we dig even deeper into the complexities of this conflict, its potential global impact, and the paths to peace.
It's a journey worth taking.
One that can help us understand not only the world around us, but also our own place in it. It really has. But we can't lose sight of the human side of all this. We're talking about a war that's already caused immense suffering and tragically claimed so many lives.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in the geopolitical maneuvering, but this is ultimately about real people, individuals whose lives have been shattered.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that sometimes.
Families torn apart by the violence.
And any talk of peace, it has to address that trauma, right? Rebuilding trust between communities that have been so deeply divided by this conflict.
Exactly. It's about healing those wounds that go much deeper than any border or territory.
Speaking of rebuilding, we haven't really talked about the economic impact of a potential peace deal. What kind of financial costs are we looking at, and who would end up footing the bill for all that reconstruction?
That's a really important question, and the answer is, unfortunately, it's not a simple one. The cost of rebuilding Ukraine's infrastructure, getting its economy back on track, and mending the social fabric, it's going to be astronomical, potentially hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions. Wow, that's hard to even fathom. Where would that kind of money even come from? Who would take on that responsibility?
It would have to be a multi-pronged approach, most likely, a combination of international aid, private investment, and contributions from Ukraine itself.
So a global effort, essentially.
Yeah, the EU, the US, and other countries, they'd probably play a big role in providing financial assistance.
Right, and then private investment to kind of jumpstart the economy.
Exactly. It's about creating a sustainable path forward, not just a quick fix,
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a monumental task. And what about the issue of accountability for potential war crimes? How do you even begin to address that in the aftermath of something so complex and brutal?
That's a really tough one for sure, and a sensitive issue. It's definitely filled with challenges. There are growing calls for investigations into alleged war crimes committed by both sides.
Yeah, I've seen those reports.
But pursuing justice in such a tangled web of accusations and counter-accusations, especially in a region where the fog of war still hasn't cleared, it's going to be a daunting task. It requires a lot of careful investigation, impartial judgment, and a real commitment to finding the truth and reconciling the different sides.
It highlights the fact that achieving peace goes way beyond just signing a piece of paper.
It does.
It means addressing those deep wounds, ensuring justice, holding people accountable, and working towards genuine reconciliation between people who've been forced into conflict.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a long and difficult process, and one that needs patience, empathy, and willingness to face some uncomfortable truths. But it's absolutely vital if we want to build a peace that lasts, one based on a foundation of justice and a shared commitment to a better future.
So we've got these massive economic challenges to tackle, the need for justice and accountability, and this long road to reconciliation ahead. What role do you see the international community playing in all of this? Can they really make a difference in such a complicated and multifaceted situation?
They have a crucial role to play, for sure, a responsibility to support Ukraine's recovery, both financially and politically. That means providing humanitarian aid to those who need it, encouraging economic development, and facilitating dialogue between the different sides to try and bridge those divides and foster some understanding. They need to act as a catalyst for healing and progress.
That sounds like a pretty tall order, requiring a lot of coordination and a shared vision. Do you think the international community is up to the task? Can they overcome their own internal divisions and political agendas to truly make a difference?
It's definitely a test of global cooperation and solidarity. It means putting aside self-interest and focusing on the common good. There will be competing interests and roadblocks to overcome, without a doubt. But the stakes are simply too high to let those obstacles derail the effort. The human cost of inaction is just too great.
Yeah, you can't ignore that. It's a call to action, a reminder that what happens in one part of the world affects us all. What about the role of everyday citizens like us, the ones watching from afar? Is there anything we can do to contribute to these peace efforts, or are we just bystanders in this whole global drama?
Absolutely not. We're not just bystanders. Everyone's voice matters. Everyone can play a role in creating a more peaceful world. Stay informed about what's happening. Make sure you're getting information from trustworthy sources and not falling for misinformation or propaganda. You can support those humanitarian organizations that are working tirelessly on the ground to ease suffering and provide aid to those in need. And don't underestimate the power of advocating for peaceful solutions through your elected representatives. Let your voice be heard. Even small actions can make a difference, like ripples spreading outwards and contributing to a wave of change.
That's an empowering message. It's a reminder that we're not powerless, that we can all contribute to building a better future. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of it all, to feel insignificant in the face of such immense suffering, but it's important to remember that each of us is part of the solution, that our collective actions can create a more just and peaceful world.
Couldn't agree more. Every voice counts. Every act of compassion matters. Together, we can create a world where peace isn't just a distant dream, but a living, breathing reality.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From potential peace talks to the complexities of making sure everyone keeps their word and the huge economic challenges. But there's one area we haven't really delved into yet. The impact on everyday people, both in Ukraine, where the war is still going on, and in the rest of the world.
That's so important, you know. It's easy to focus on all the political maneuvering, but we have to remember that wars are fought by and have a devastating impact on ordinary people.
It's hard to even think about the human cost, the families torn apart, lives lost, dreams just shattered. It feels so overwhelming. But what can we as individuals actually do to help in the face of such suffering?
Even small acts of kindness and support can make a difference. They can spread and create real change. One tangible thing people can do is donate to reliable humanitarian organizations working in Ukraine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those organizations are providing vital aid, food, shelter, medical care, even psychological support to people displaced and traumatized by the war.
A concrete action we can all take. And it reminds us that achieving peace isn't just about stopping the fighting, it's about creating a society where everyone has a real chance to thrive.
Exactly. It's about tackling the root causes of conflict, encouraging dialogue and understanding, fostering a culture of peace. It's a long-term effort that demands real commitment and a belief in a better future.
It really does. This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've explored so much. Potential peace negotiations, the challenges of verification, the immense economic costs of war, the need for accountability, and the path towards reconciliation.
We've emphasized the human cost of this conflict and how important it is for each of us to do what we can to promote peace. It's clear the situation in Ukraine is far from over, and the choices made in the coming months and years will affect us all.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I hope people understand that the situation in Ukraine isn't black and white. It's a complex mix of historical grievances, geopolitical interests, clashing ideologies, and human aspirations. Recognizing this complexity, acknowledging the different perspectives, that's the first step towards finding solutions.
A powerful message, one that encourages us to really think critically and engage in thoughtful dialogue, even when it's hard.
Absolutely. Peace isn't a passive state. It's something we actively pursue every single day through our actions, words, and commitment to a better world. It's a journey we must undertake together with empathy and a belief in a brighter future.
Well said. This deep dive has challenged us to look deeper, to grapple with complex issues, and to consider the many paths to peace. We hope it's given you, our listener, a better understanding of the conflict in Ukraine, its global impact, and what we can do to help build a more peaceful future. Peace isn't just the absence of war, it's the presence of justice, equality, and opportunity for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear.